Let me ask you something before we even get started. What would it take for a 20-year-old to walk into the most powerful organization in women's tennis and commercially embarrass every single established star on the roster? Not through controversy, not through scandal, just by being exactly who she is. Because that is precisely what happened. And when the numbers came in, the WTA didn't throw a celebration. They opened an investigation. This is the story that mainstream tennis media has been carefully dancing around, so we are going to say it completely, clearly, and without pulling a single punch. Picture the inside of a WTA commercial review meeting. Standard stuff. Spreadsheets on the screen, quarterly projections on the table, the usual names sitting at the top of the merchandise columns: Swiatek, Sabalenka, Goff. These were the faces the organization had spent years and millions of dollars building their entire commercial identity around. Corporate partners paid premium rates to align with those names. Sponsors structured entire campaigns around those faces. That was the machine. That was the system. And it had worked, reliably, for years. Then someone in that room quietly pointed to the top of the column, a name nobody had planned for. Alex Eala. Not second. Not third. First. And not barely first. First by a margin so dramatic that senior executives reportedly demanded the figures be re-verified before they were shared internally. Because the idea that a player outside the top 25 could generate jersey and merchandise revenue exceeding the combined sales of 3 Grand Slam champions seemed, to anyone operating inside traditional tennis marketing logic, completely impossible. Except it had already happened. It was just another Tuesday. So here is the question you should be sitting with right now. Why would a sports organization investigate its own player for being too popular? Keep watching, because the answer is more uncomfortable than most people want to admit. To fully understand how we got here, you need to understand who Alex actually is. Not just the highlight clips, not just the ranking number, but the full picture. Born in Quezon City, Philippines, on May 23, 2005, she grew up with a racket in her hand and an entire nation quietly watching, hoping, waiting to see if she could be the one who finally broke through. In March 2026, she reached a career-high ranking of world number 29, making her the highest-ranked Filipino player in WTA history. Not just the highest right now, the highest ever, in the entire history of the tour. But here is what rankings don't tell you. Rankings describe results. They don't describe gravity. Because wherever Alex showed up, Abu Dhabi, Auckland, Dubai, Miami, something shifted in the atmosphere. Stadiums that normally hold polite tennis crowds started feeling like a hybrid between a rock concert and a championship fight night. The energy was different. The noise was different. People weren't just watching tennis anymore. They were showing up specifically for her. Coco Gauff, reigning Grand Slam champion, one of the most recognizable athletes on the planet, publicly apologized to fans for making them wait before a match against Alex. Think about what that actually means. One of the sport's biggest stars felt the need to acknowledge on camera that the crowd in that stadium had come specifically for her opponent. When was the last time you saw that happen in professional tennis? Her breakout 2025 season announced her to the world in the most dramatic way possible. She entered the Miami Open as a wild card, not a seed, not an established name, a wild card, and proceeded to beat the number 5 player in the world, then the number 2 player in the world, back-to-back, before reaching the semifinals. Nobody modeled that. Nobody projected it. She just walked through the front door and rewrote what was considered possible. Sky Sports lead presenter Gigi Salmon gave her verdict on what Alex represented, saying she might already be the biggest star in women's tennis. Not a future contender, not a rising talent, the biggest star, present tense. Now let's talk about the merchandise, because this is where the story stops being a feel-good underdog narrative and starts getting genuinely complicated. Nike released a limited edition shirt, Alex's name, the Sampaguita flower, the national flower of the Philippines, printed over an image of the grass courts at the All England Club, designed by Filipino artist Georgina Camus. Thoughtful, beautiful, layered with cultural meaning, the market's response was staggering, sold out across 4 continents within 48 hours. Now understand what that number actually represents. This wasn't just a merchandise story. This was a market speaking with complete clarity. The Philippines alone carries a population exceeding 115 million deeply passionate sports supporters. Add the Filipino diaspora spread across the United States, the Middle East, Europe, and Southeast Asia, people who buy jerseys at 3 in the morning to catch a live stream, People who book flights across continents to sit in stadiums for 2 hours. People who don't just follow their player, but invest in her completely. And you have a commercial force that the WTA's existing models had never encountered in this form before. Nike understood immediately. When Alex visited Nike's world headquarters in Oregon, her portrait was placed in the legendary Ambassador Tunnel alongside some of the most iconic athletes across all sports, with a caption reading, "History in full bloom." Nike doesn't put people in that tunnel as a courtesy. That placement is earned. That placement is data. Comparisons started circulating to Emma Raducanu's commercial explosion after her 2021 US Open win, which reshaped how tennis brands allocated marketing budgets for 18 months. Alex hadn't even captured a Grand Slam singles title yet, and she was already producing numbers at that level. Globe Telecom, Bank of the Philippine Islands, Babolat, locally juice major companies were lining up. Vogue Philippines put her on the cover. The commercial world understood exactly what it was looking at. The institutional world lagged. And that lag, deliberate or structural, became the story. Here is what reportedly happened inside those closed WTA doors. When the merchandise figures landed on the desks of board members, the internal reaction was not excitement. It was not strategic enthusiasm about how to leverage this commercial phenomenon. According to sources close to the matter, multiple board members raised formal concerns, centered on what they called merchandising equity, a phrase that sounds procedurally neutral until you look carefully at who it was being applied to. The argument, as reconstructed from multiple accounts, went something like this. If Alex's commercial pull was so dominant that it was distorting market expectations and pulling sponsor attention away from established WTA stars, was that a natural market force? Or was it an anomaly requiring correction? Read that again, slowly. They were debating whether Alex being too commercially powerful was a problem that needed to be fixed. The answer to anyone outside that boardroom is breathtakingly obvious. The market wasn't broken. The market was speaking. And it was speaking in a language the WTA's commercial infrastructure simply wasn't built to hear. One rooted in Southeast Asian fan culture, in diaspora loyalty, in a form of passionate communal pride that doesn't map neatly onto the traditional tennis sponsorship playbook. Instead of learning that language, some people in that boardroom wanted to manage it. But internal investigations in professional sports rarely stay internal. Someone always talks. A memo surfaces. A frustrated executive sends an email to the wrong person, and what was meant to stay behind closed doors becomes a headline. When this story broke publicly, fans started paying very close attention to how Alex was actually being treated by the organization tasked with promoting her. What they found was a pattern. WTA promotional emails featuring Swiatek, Sabalenka, and Goff, with no mention of Alex, despite her outperforming all three in jersey revenue. Side-by-side comparisons of homepage placements. Tournament feature articles that buried her achievements under coverage of players she had already defeated. Flagship marketing materials prominently showcasing players ranked below her in both performance and commercial impact. The gap between what the market said about Alex and what the institutional machinery reflected was not subtle, it was glaring, and fans with smartphones don't stay quiet about things like that. The screenshots spread. The hashtags spread faster. Former players started commenting. Tennis journalists began connecting the dots. Prominent voices in the sport started asking the question that was sitting underneath all of it. If Alex's passport was from Western Europe instead of Southeast Asia, would her promotional treatment look the same? If her fan base was centered in London or Paris rather than Manila, would anyone be investigating her jersey sales? Those are uncomfortable questions. They are supposed to be uncomfortable. That discomfort is exactly the point. There were scheduling decisions layered into this too. At the Dubai Championships, Alex was moved to a night session start, a shift that had knock-on effects for crowd numbers in surrounding matches. Tournament organizers had their reasons. But that decision didn't exist in isolation. It existed inside months of accumulated patterns that observers had been quietly documenting. Once the investigation story broke, every one of those decisions came under a microscope. Tennis 365 ran features. Tennis Head published analysis. Filipino sports publications mobilized immediately. Global Tennis social media spent 48 straight hours doing nothing but dissecting the implications. What was designed to stay behind closed doors became one of the most significant institutional conversations women's tennis had seen in years. And through every headline, every debate, every opinion piece, Alex was in Miami preparing to compete. That contrast matters. Because while Suits debated her sales figures in air-conditioned conference rooms, she was on the practice court, working. Here is what strikes you most when you pull back from the politics and just look at the person at the center of all of it. She said in her Vogue Philippines interview, "I like to emulate the best of us Filipinos." She spoke about wanting to be a good person as something that matters to her just as much as anything she achieves on court. No political statement, no institutional jabs, no boardroom posturing. Just a 20-year-old who still walks to the same restaurants she visited as a kid in Quezon City, who is now having to get used to strangers asking for photos on streets she has known her entire life. She described it herself. "It is weird because being at home is like the most normal thing, but being famous at home is something to get used to. The entire weight of overnight transformation compressed into one honest moment. She is still that girl from Quezon City. She is simultaneously one of the most commercially powerful athletes in women's sports right now. Both things are completely true. Both are extraordinary. Now look at where she stands entering the 2026 Miami Open. Seeded 31st. Ranked 29th in the world, returning to the exact tournament where, 12 months earlier, she walked in as an unseeded wild card and rewrote the entire script of what was considered possible. She beat the number 5 player. She beat the number 2 player. She reached the semifinals. None of that was supposed to happen according to anyone's projection. Now she's back, and the expectations have shifted entirely. She is the first Filipino to break into the top 30. The first with multiple wins over top 10 players and major champions. The first to reach a tour-level final in the Open era. First. At some point, that word stops feeling like a milestone and starts feeling like a defining personality trait. The WTA investigation into her jersey sales will eventually be filed away somewhere, cataloged. Most of the people who participated in it will quietly move on, because that is what happens with investigations that end up revealing far more about the investigators than the person being investigated. What doesn't get filed away are the jerseys with the Sampaguita flower. Those are on people's backs right now, in Manila, in Miami, in Dubai, in Auckland, in cities where women's tennis was never supposed to generate this level of devotion. She didn't just outsell a roster. She expanded the entire universe of people who genuinely care about this sport.